Hi everyone, thank you for your patience. This is Lauren Migliozzi again, host of today's presentation. I'm just going to re-announce the presenters quickly, and then we'll go right into the story of the actual advanced hack. So today's speakers again are Jean-Paul Bourgeot with Swiss Data and Roy Boivin with Intel Security, formerly known as McAfee. Jean-Paul will be walking you through the advanced hack, and Roy will be here as the technical expert to help Jean-Paul discuss how this could have been defended. I'm going to turn it over to them now. Thanks again for your patience.
Thank you, Lauren. Again, thank you, Roy, for joining us. So I'm just going to go right to the story. We had a little bit of a front end that we'll just go right to the actual hack. So the three main starts of the main levels of this are the setup, where the initial hack was planned, and then the preparation once they had where they wanted to go, what they did to prepare, and then the final hack that went into the agency. You can see some of the specifics here. They first wanted to find the target and select the target. Then they used some preparation to plan how they were going to attack the target. And then they actually went into the agency, grabbed information, and walked out the door. So what you're seeing in this picture actually is snapshots of the infographic that is on our Cyber Attack Defenders website, and you're able to get the entire infographic there. We've actually provided, if you want to download it, the file in the far left side of your screen in the bottom. But if you don't grab it there and you want to grab it later, you can go to our Cyber Attack Defenders website. So the first step was a nation state, and we're pretty clear it was a nation state, decided they wanted to go after a specific agency. So they picked that agency and then started collecting a team of both physical and online virtual spies to do the job, hackers to do the job. They went out and what we believe is a fairly generic search for who worked for the agency, what could they identify as potential lead-ins, people that would be the avenue to get into the agency. They went and did online profiling, and this is where we really start to know for sure what they were doing, because they did an online profile, and obviously they did the simplest things like do a Google search or go to Facebook or LinkedIn, but the reason we know they did this is because they did identify about a dozen paid online background searches on specific agency targets, including the person that was eventually selected, and it was all bought with the same credit card, which was a prepaid card you couldn't really trace. So it was pretty interesting that they were able to identify that that actually happened. So they were able to show that this was targeted, this was researched, and then finally, once they did all this online background checking, they went and chose 3 specific people that they would then do more investigation. They did a physical profiling and were able to identify some physical cues that they actually staked out people's houses. They followed them around. The things they were most interested in is things about their life that would make them the most viable target. And you can see a list of some of the things they were looking at. Things like, are they home a lot, which means they would be home using their internet a lot. Do they have home Wi-Fi, which is the most important, was whether or not they had home Wi-Fi. There's other things we believe they identified, one of which is very important in that list. I won't tell you what it is, but you'll find out pretty quickly which one it was. Once they identified the person, well, one question was, how do we defend against this? This is not something that is even cybersecurity related. This is very much social engineering, and the only way we can defend against this is really education and possibly special protection against people who we believe are high value or the most likely to be attacked. Once they did decide on a person, and this is where we start to get into real cybersecurity avenues of what they were doing, once they did pick a person, what they did is they went to that person's home and they hacked into his home wireless and were able to get into their router. And what we were able to determine afterwards is that once they were into the router, they actually shut the router down and stood up a fake router so that the target had no idea. They thought they were logging into the router in their basement or wherever, but they were actually logging into a fake router that looked like theirs. And when you look at what they did, you might ask, Well, why would they do that, especially considering the agency that we're talking about and the specific target we're talking about did not actually bring any work home from them? So what would they be doing? And we'll talk about why they were interested in grabbing the traffic. One question again is how do we defend against that? That's a very tough thing to defend against. And Roy, I don't know if you have anything on that, on how you could defend a home network that's not in the enterprise.
Well, if you use security as a service, you can tie your enterprise security infrastructure and allow your employees to access the same policies and profiles on their home internet, on their work environments. And that can kind of help mitigate some of that by passing the traffic through your existing security infrastructure at your home.
Thank you. So once they were doing this, and once the home person was using the bad guys' router instead of their own, I might ask, well, if the employee was not using any work traffic from home, if they were not allowed to take anything home, what were they doing? And the real answer is they were looking to establish what's called a waterhole attack. And to do that, they had to know where this particular user who they were going to target inside of the agency was going on a regular basis and establish his pattern of traffic. And the assumption was, and it turned out to be correct, is if someone goes to a certain amount of sites from home on a very often basis, they'll probably go to it from what's called the nipper side, from their work facility, where they are allowed to go outside the agency and go surf the web. And that's exactly what we'll see in this as we go through the steps here. The first thing they did is they identified what sites is he going to, and then monitor those and look for an identification. Now, obviously, the identification will show the home access, but it'll also show, hey, that's his same computer, that's the same guy, because the amount of sites we're talking about, 5 to 6 sites, if they're able to get into those sites and monitor someone who also is going to those sites but has a different identification than the home computer, they're now able to say that is the same guy from a different computer, and we're able to identify that is his work computer. And there's two reasons they wanted to do that. They wanted to make sure, number one, they had the right person, but number two, they wanted to identify his operating system, what patch levels he had, what applications he might be using, and what versions, because that would identify holes. Roy, anything you wanted to say on what we're looking at and what they were doing at this step?
A lot of what they're doing is they're taking a lot of these different websites and they're checking the correlation between them. And then when you actually look at an enterprise environment, there's only going to be a few people within an enterprise that are going to match the same exact sites and the same exact links within those sites that they're visiting on a regular basis. And that's how they're able to slowly identify who this person is and be able to identify what operating system he's using within his environment.
So once they do that, they go and they pick the most vulnerable sites, aka let's say a Little League site, and they'll put a malware in that site that's specifically designed for that particular computer that is very, very targeted and not broad, so that the average person won't get infected, only the exact system that's specifically targeted. Roy, anything you want to say about what's going on and how we might fight that, since it's specifically designed for him and not a general malware?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of this type of activity going on nowadays where most of the malware that's out there that's being targeted at these agencies is very highly sophisticated targeted malware to an individual or a group within an agency. And the only way to really defend against this is to actually emulate the existing desktop that they're running in, the exact same patch levels, the exact same operating system, the exact same versions of Office and Adobe, and actually run the malware in those environments to identify what's really going on. And so that's kind of what we're going to get into in the future here, is showing you how you can actually do that with our products.
So when you're saying the exact system, is there some some situations where it might not be exact? You know, there's a lot of sandboxing out there, there's a lot of going on. So you're saying that we need to be very, very careful to emulate that exact environment when we're testing this malware?
Right, and the other thing is not just emulating in a standard Windows build, you know, that your gold disk image is not going to be necessarily the identical thing that everyone's running across your environment. And so having the ability to custom build your sandbox environment and not just do traditional dynamic analysis of double-clicking the file and seeing what happens when you run it, because this type of malware is going to be very targeted, and it's going to be known that there is sandboxing in your environment, and they're not going to allow it to run if it's detected to be running in a VM. It's going to be checking those hooks, as we call them, to see, am I running on a VM or am I running on a physical piece of hardware? And that's where static analysis comes in. And so that static analysis, even if the file doesn't run on double-clicking it in your sandbox, that static analysis is going to rip apart the entire code and analyze the code and see, well, it didn't run when we double-clicked it, but if it had been on Jim Bob's or whoever's desktop with these specific attributes, it would have ran, and here's what would have happened if it ran.
Interesting. So one more thing about that, Roy. So if it's doing, and I would like you to make sure that the listeners understand, when you're saying static analysis, you're saying that the program doesn't actually run, as opposed to what to be clear is called dynamic analysis, where it only analyzes what it does when it actually runs.
Correct. Static analysis is actually reviewing the code of the malware.
Gotcha. As opposed to reviewing what the code does when you execute it.
Correct.
Okay. So then, when this hack actually goes through, the malware was designed to get past the malware sandbox, get past the firewall, and there's an infection. So step 8 here, you see that the targeted computer gets infected. In this particular situation, the code was analyzed afterwards, and what it did is it used pre-negotiated communications. It actually was pre-negotiated encryption so that the traffic couldn't even be viewed, and so that information that's being communicated can be obfuscated. Once they did that and they established communication, they actually didn't do much besides monitor. In this particular hack, they watched for actually a pretty long time, very, very patient situation, monitoring and gathering as much information without actually doing anything. Once they felt like they had gathered as much information from just being a passive watcher, they actually started to do some command and control, move laterally throughout the environment. They were able to infect some other computers, and poke through and monitor those and move again laterally. What eventually happened is a very high-value database was discovered, and what later found out that through some of the command and control, some infiltration or some exfiltration had been happening. But in the final step, they found a database they could not break up because it was way too large to break up and move. And they decided that the danger of being caught while trying to move that big of a database over a long period of time was greater than the value of going ahead and moving the big database and being discovered and knowing they were going to be discovered. And that's what they did. They waited for a downtime, and they moved a very large amount of information out of the environment, knowing they would be detected because of that movement, and had pre-planned to scrub themselves. And that's what we'll see in the next step. Anything you want to say about these steps, Roy?
There are a couple ways you could have stopped this. You could have used a web proxy with full SSL decryption, and that would have not allowed the pre-negotiated SSL communication to go out of your environment. You also could have been using a next-gen firewall that does layer 7 applications and been able to identify that this is not something that's out of the normal. It's not coming from a web browser. You also could have used what we call our endpoint intelligence agent, which is in the McAfee IPS, or a network security platform, which will tell you what application on the desktop is actually causing that network traffic. And if we didn't see that coming from a web browser or whatever it's identified as supposed to be coming from, we could have stopped it right there in its tracks.
So you're saying if the endpoint, say the name of the product again?
Endpoint intelligence agent?
The endpoint intelligence agent had seen, for let's say, that a driver suddenly was communicating that it's not even a network product or network program was communicating on the network and communicating out of the agency, then they would know that's not normal. We can lock that down.
Correct. Yeah. If it's a DLL file, it should not be causing network traffic, and therefore it could have been stopped right there in its path.
Is that common, that just an average file will be taken over and they'll start doing network traffic that it shouldn't do?
A lot of times the malware is written into like Calculator or Notepad.exe or other applications that you would commonly use, but aren't designed to do network activity. And
so it's hiding itself in the task manager so that people wouldn't detect what's going on.
Correct.
Got it. Anything else you want to add to that before we move on?
Nope.
So then, as we discussed a second ago, they knew they were going to be detected. They were moving a lot of data out of the agency network. And so they start covering the tracks, trying to delete logs, trying to obfuscate as much as possible who they are and where everything went. and poof, they disappear. At least short time, they disappear. In this particular situation, the agency was able to backtrack on what happened. So after they disappear, it becomes a very tedious process to go back and figure out what happened. So moving forward a little bit, I'll give you the floor, Roy, to kind of tie everything we've talked about together here.
So the advanced malware market wisdom is that things are going to be coming in, they're going to be analyzed. Hold on one second. And so we want to analyze these and see what is good and what is bad. So your standard malware stuff that you're looking at now is mainly signature-based defensive. It's ineffective against the unknown. Malware that's going to be changing or going to be targeted towards your environment. It's not going to be picked up in a standard signature set. Sandboxing, currently you have a couple other vendors out there, including Cuckoo, which is an open source sandbox, but it's really doing just dynamic analysis. It's run the suspect file in a safe virtual environment, analyze the actual behavior of the unknown file. And as we showed earlier, that's not very effective when it's being targeted to a specific person or checking to see if it's being run in a virtual environment.
And Roy, I wanted to throw in there, one of the things I've heard recently in the industry is the two things that are common now in malware is delays. So if you run it and it's got a 24-hour delay, it won't show up in a sandbox. In that case, a static would catch it, right?
Oh, static would catch it, but there's also our malware system, as well as some of the other malware systems on the market, can edit the file and reduce those jumps.
Gotcha.
So it's not taking a 24-hour period. It'll actually run it as if it's current, but there are other techniques of avoiding that as well.
Yeah. And if you have a virtual environment that blows up and shuts down and stands up again, that key will never be there the second time, which I thought was a really interesting way to prevent being detected.
That's a very simple way of preventing it. So sandboxing is resource intensive and can't be done in real time. You have to take the file offline and analyze it. Most of our current security technologies have to make a decision within milliseconds. Otherwise, you're causing network latency. If I'm browsing the web, I can't analyze every single file within a half a millisecond so that my user experience is staying the same. So by itself, dynamic analysis is not effective against these types of malware. So what we have come up with is a comprehensive approach to malware, and this is our advanced threat defense system. So what we do is we are able to find the malware. So we're taking from our endpoint agent, we're taking from our network IPS, our web gateway, and our email gateway, any file that's coming into your environment. We're passing that over to the ATD appliance, which is our sandboxing that does static and dynamic analysis for analysis. So we're passing those over there, and we're kind of seeing what's going on. So it's going to be run against your efficient AV signature. So do I know this already? Is it standard AV? Do I know anything from our GTI cloud, our global threat intelligence? We're going to emulate this and see what happens first. We're going to see what the user's desktop is from EPO. So we're going to query who this was going to and say this is the desktop that this was being run against or this was being targeted to, and we're going to run that in our ATD sandbox. And so we're doing target-specific sandboxing, and we're also doing static code analysis. But by doing all these steps in a layered order, we're able to identify and remediate a lot of stuff right off the top of the bat that's known bad. And so we're not actually causing a lot of resource-intensive behaviors, and we're able to respond back in those millisecond increments back to our endpoint intelligence agent, network IPS, web gateway, and email gateway without having to go all the way down to static analysis on every single file. And this helps reduce your user experience of known bads and known goods. So once we find something, we can send it over to McAfee Solutions and GTI. We can kind of freeze that in time. So we're sending information back to these products, the Endpoint Intelligence Agent, IPS, Web Gateway, and Email Gateway, saying this is now a known bad MD5 hash. Anytime you see this file coming into my environment, stop it immediately. So you're actually stopping the spread of Zeusbot, Game Over Zeus, whatever it may be coming into your environment. You're stopping that threat so it can't spread it within your environment anymore. And then we're taking that one step further, and we're using other automated host cleaning like McAfee Real-Time or malware fingerprint queries within real-time to actually go and find that in our environment and remediate that. And so we're actually taking the entire malware as it's coming in, an unknown targeted specific piece of malware, and we're able to identify it, we're able to freeze it, and we're able to remediate it.
Thanks, Roy. I appreciate that. So wrapping up on this, we'll get to your questions in a second. Just wanted to talk real quick. One of the reasons we're so tied in with McAfee in this is because we have a broad range of products and vendors that we work with on our cyber attack defenders community. We have cyberattackdefenders.com, and if you go to that, website, what you'll find is that we've created a video series. We now have 2 up. We have a 3rd coming soon. We have 2 in the series. It's actually a 4 that tells the story of this hack as well as a couple others all combined into one story, which made it kind of a super hack. And that video series is kind of a dramatization to try and make it real and understood about what a hack really can look like and how it can impact people. It's on the website, Cyber Attack Defenders, and we have social media out there. We have some blogs, some podcasting, Twitter. We have some Q&As with different industry professionals, as well as some quality content. We have a whiteboard that's actually going up pretty soon. We have white papers, infographics, some blogs, and some other information from various different vendors that we've partnered with. So if you'd like to check that out, go to Cyber Attack Defenders. The link is on the left-hand side. So if you'd like to see the videos, go to cyberattackdefenders.com. Currently, the one on the main screen is number 2, but if you click down on that one, it actually gives you a link to the first, or you can click down the bottom. Right below it is the first video you can start with. We appreciate the time, and we'll look now for what the questions might be that Roy and I can answer. Unfortunately, I can't give you a T-shirt over the webinar.
Okay, so thank you, Jean-Paul and Roy. I invite you all to toggle back to the original viewing screen by clicking on the full screen button again. If anyone does have a question, and I see that we have a few, please type it into the pod to the left of the main screen. We'll hopefully get to all the questions, but if we run out of time, we will respond via email. We do have a few questions, so I'm going to get to the first one. How did the hackers' IP addresses not set off alarms? Weren't they on a banned list somewhere?
So in this situation, we don't know the exact IP addresses that they were originating from, but what was able to be identified is that they were standing up and shutting down IP addresses that were actually fairly close to the agency's physical location. They just found a hosting site, and they were standing up proxy points so that they could not be identified on any sort of banned list. Unfortunately, we were not able to identify, but the agency was not able to identify where the actual IP addresses ended. They bounced through several proxies and kind of disappeared. So unfortunately, the end result was not able to be identified, but the hosting site, the local hosting site, was identified where some IP addresses were being stood up, and there were new IP addresses, therefore they weren't on a ban list anywhere.
So wouldn't this have been stopped if the customer had an XYZ malware sandbox running?
Thanks for removing the name. So really it comes down to specifically one of the reasons we have McAfee here is that generic malware sandbox engines, some have all the different tools, some don't. And I know McAfee's does, but as Roy pointed out, that the malware sandboxing has to have the ability to do several things. One is it has to have the ability to emulate the specific environment that the malware is looking for, or it won't execute. And the second thing is if you know it and you cannot get it to execute for some reason, you have to be able to do the static analysis. So we're not going to say which malware sandbox was being specifically asked, but in this case, one of the reasons we at Switch Data really like the McAfee sandbox engine is because it does do those things that would identify these kind of situations.
Okay, so the next question we have is, can the Wi-Fi hacking that was shown at the employee's house be stopped?
Well, you know, Roy mentioned that there are some ways you can mitigate what happened, but honestly, home Wi-Fi is almost impossible to defend completely against. As long as it's a commercial, Linksys or one of these, Netgear Wi-Fi routers, they're really not very well protected, and it's really difficult unless you put an enterprise router up. And enterprise routers are fairly expensive, and therefore it doesn't scale very well to put those at the home user site. If it's a very high value, there are some tools and some enterprise solutions out there that could defend, and obviously agencies have those deployed in the enterprise environment. Roy, is there anything you want to say about that?
No, like you said, it's very hard to defend against your home enterprise, especially looking at it from a corporate perspective and trying to protect the home internet. The best practices is user education, and don't allow your users to take work home that's sensitive.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Looks like we have 2 more questions. So, how did they get into his home router, and was the password a simple one?
So I don't know the exact password, but the way it was explained to me is they did an SSID search. They found his SSID. It was, hidden or not a big deal. It's easy to find them even if they are hidden. And what they were able to do, and this is really scarily simple, they stood up an SSID that was identical to the user's. And what happens is a home computer sees both, and it can bounce back and forth and try to log into the fake one. And what the hackers apparently did, or at least this is pretty easy to know because many ethical hackers know how to do this, is instead of the router wanting to get a password and a user ID, it just captured what was given to them as a password and a user ID. So therefore, once they captured it, they were able then to emulate what would have been the other router, get that person on, and now they're able to get into the home wireless router, and they were able to hack in, shut it down. What actually happened is they shut down the other person's router, and that was identified because once this hack was discovered, the home user router was brought in, and they discovered it hadn't been on in 3 months. So the user was kind of surprised because he thought he'd been using his router, and it actually, the log showed, hadn't been physically booted in 3 months. So they apparently had gotten in, shut it down. Roy, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so hacking Wi-Fi is very simple, and with $15, anyone who has a laptop can go on the internet and identify how to do this. It doesn't take much. There's a lot of open source software where if I wanted to, I could walk into a Starbucks and tell everybody's phone to de-authenticate to whatever wireless they are and re-authenticate to anything they possibly know, and I don't necessarily need to know their password. And so there's programs out there called like the Yes Man, where if you're asking, hey, my home router is named, HomeNet. Does HomeNet exist? Which is what your phone or your laptop does, is it broadcasts asking, are these networks out there that I've already authenticated to? All I have to do is respond yes, and you're now connected to me, thinking you're on your own network. So having somebody re-authenticate is very simple and cost-effective as well.
It's really tough to defend against.
Absolutely.
Okay, so last question to wrap things up. If the hackers covered their tracks to go poof at the end, how did the agency figure out what happened?
Great question. In this particular case, the hackers did not have access to the SIM, IPS, and the security enterprise collection of data. They were able only to delete their logs and obfuscate. So they were able to go poof from the easy logs, from the ones that are on the computers that were compromised, and they were able to delete their tracks, per se, on the systems they had gotten into. But both the network traffic and the SIM logs of the systems that they had gotten into were collected and stored. And so it was just a matter of time and collecting up that and correlating all that information from the network traffic and the SIM logs, what actually happened. It takes a little longer to do when you have to go back to the enterprise and not directly to the computers that were hacked to do. But in this case, they did not have access to, and the agency is a well-designed agency, just they got caught this time, but the agency did have enough information stored in their security infrastructure to put the pieces together. Roy, do you have anything to say about that besides?
No, obviously a SIM solution or a log collection solution is obviously going to be your best bet to mitigate that type of threat. When a system is wiped out entirely, at least you have backup log data of what happened, and that you can then go and trace to see what actually happened and how it happened and who's responsible for that.
Yeah. So is that all the questions, Lauren?
Yeah, it looks like that's all the questions.
Well, we're going to... Go ahead. I was going to say Oh, can I show the video from here?
No.
Okay. Sorry, we're discussing for McAfee, and we have some a white paper we've produced, and that white paper actually is not on Cyber Attack Defenders yet. It is pre-released for you if you want to grab it quickly and look at it. It will be on our site soon, but currently is not. And then there's a McAfee find, freeze, fix white paper or solution. I think the technology brief is what it's called. That's a really good one. So as we log off and give you back 15 minutes of your day, please check out our documents and check out the web links on the left.
Okay, so thank you, Jean-Paul and Roy. That wraps up our presentation, Advanced Persistent Threat, the Real Story of an Agency Breach. An archive link of this presentation will be sent to you in the next couple of days. In the meantime, if you do have any questions and we didn't get to them, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we will be responding via email. Thank you again for your time and attention, and that about wraps it up.